So before we get started and really get all this going, I just wanted to give a quick introduction and thank you to Mr. Michael and Ms. Rehan, who are here today with us. So if you guys can stand up and wave and just say hello. Say hello. They have been instrumental to getting this event together, and we will be excited to have this whole event going. So without further ado, we are now starting United States history through the decades, and may I please have Mr. Michael McMillan. Can everyone give a round of applause?
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, terrific. I'm delighted to see a large crowd here tonight, and I have prepared a few short words to give you a little bit of context. I'm not going to read them. I'm going to try to live up to the standards of our presenters who will not be reading. And so therefore, I'm the director of the American Language Center here in Rabat. Most of you probably know it, but maybe not all of you. We are in the neighborhood, a mere block or two away, and we've been around for about half a century, and for the most part, we teach English. And we, in addition to that, are involved in cultural exchange and clubs and activities, a lot of different things. We're quite large. We have almost 7,000 people a week come through our building. And I think about the time that COVID ended and when we returned, we began to realize that the ALC Rabat was a bit of a intellectual hub for the community, and that was a really good feeling. We began to think at that time that it might be a good idea to return to opening a library, and we are on the verge of doing that. Very happy about that. And in 2022, we formed a collaboration with a small group of young people in Morocco with the name of Brainline, and Brainline is involved in tutoring and helping gifted young Moroccans to apply for studying in university abroad, generally in America, but in other countries as well. And when we began that program 2 years ago, this month actually, we thought it would be wonderful if after 1 year we had one or two people who had been accepted, and if we were incredibly lucky, maybe they got a scholarship. 1 year later, we had 8. And right now, as we speak, 8 former American language students are studying around the world, and collectively, their scholarship money over the 4 years of study amounts to $1.4 million, or 14 million dirhams. Quite a bit of money. The success of that program and the idea, the concept of reopening a library really made us feel that we were on our way toward that goal of intellectual hub. Fast forward to October 2023, Brainline needed a new leader, and we thought, really, what could be better than a young Fulbright grantee? We approached Fulbright, and Rebecca Geffner was kind enough to have a very open mind about the idea, and she approached the local cohort of Fulbright student researchers, and one of them, Reese, volunteered to help us out. And he, being incredibly motivated, intelligent, and inspiring for other people, not only volunteered to lead the Brainline Club, but immediately came back with the idea of a U.S. history club. We have never tried that before. I don't think we've ever tried anything really like that before. But really overnight, he put it together, an incredible plan, and drew people into it. And they were motivated, and he was motivated to keep them motivated. And it grew, and it grew, and it got more just in depth. We could feel that it was growing and emerging to become something. And therefore, an event like tonight really became an inevitability. We knew that there was very, very much that they had to share. So we're here tonight for that sharing. We know that we will learn a lot and discover a lot. And on that note, I'd like to turn it over back to Reese. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words, Mr. McMillan, Director McMillan. So, before we get started tonight and hear some student presentations for some wonderful students, I prepared a little speech about the course that we just ran. So I will be reading, unlike Michael, because I do not hold myself to the same standards as the students. But let's get this started. Dissent is the highest form of patriotism. These are the words of Dr. Howard Zinn, author of the controversial and highly contested A People's History of the United States, 1492 to present. Dr. Howard Zinn wrote A People's History in 1980 and revised it in 2009, a year before his death. Dr. Zinn was a part of the long American socialist tradition, and he argued that, quote, historically, the most terrible things, war, genocide, and slavery, have not resulted from disobedience, but instead have resulted from obedience, end quote. For too long, United States history has been taught in a glorious and non-critical manner. Historians, such as myself and the students here, have been changing this approach. We now seek to understand history from the bottom up. One of the course objectives for modern United States history, 1944 until present, was to have students look at the unique perspectives of groups that in other histories have generally been put at the margins. To introduce myself, my name is Reese William Hollister. I'm originally from Newtown, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia, and I love it here in Morocco. However, America is my home. I graduated in 2023 with a bachelor's degree in history and international studies with Arabic minor from Manhattan College, and today I'm a Fulbright student researcher in the Kingdom of Morocco. I've been learning Arabic in Darija, and that's a great joy in my life. Additionally, I go to national and local archives to research local colonial history of Ifrin. And above all else, my greatest joy during this experience in Fulbright has been running this U.S. history course with these excellent students who are here today. I'm not done. I became aware of the American Language Center in Rabat and its mission while at the Moroccan American Commission for Educational and Cultural Exchange, known also as MACICI. Executive Director Rebecca Geffner and Program Officer Ikram Bukhari recommended that I connected with Mr. Michael McMillan, who just spoke before you. For over 40 years, MACICI has been working to promote the spirit of traditional friendship between the peoples of Morocco and the United States by facilitating academic and cultural exchanges between the two countries. The ALC's mission is quite similar, as it's a non-for-profit organization whose mission is to promote positive relations and understanding between the people of Morocco and the United States through language, culture, ideas, and opportunities. These cultural exchanges take place through people and education, and I'm truly humbled to be a part of it. While I teach students what it means to be American, as evidenced by our history, I learn from them what it means to be Moroccan. You will learn today, American history is defined by its major problems. The United States Declaration of Independence famously declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with uncertain, unalienable rights and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." You will learn from our young historians presenting today that these rights have been historically contested and often undermined through continuing forms of discrimination. Thus, the history of the United States sits on a path towards upholding the rights and the undelivered promises that were a part of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. This is the key problem of modern United States history. In the 1940s, Japanese American citizens were sent to internment camps under the guise of national security for reasons of racism and xenophobia. In the 1950s and the global Cold War, homosexuals were barred from working in federal government because they were considered to be susceptible to communism. In the 1960s, civil rights leaders like Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, and Martin Luther King, Jr. were gunned down and assassinated because they were uncompromising in their demands for freedom. In the 1970s, the Equal Rights Amendment failed to pass, and American women are still fighting for equality in the workplace and in terms of salaries. In the 1980s, the right for well-funded social services was undermined by those who thought government was not the solution to the problem, but that it was the problem. In the 1990s, Americans with disabilities only began to receive the full benefits of their citizenship. And in the 2000s, the right to privacy was undermined by the Patriot Act and the war on terror at home. And in the 2010s and the 2020s, the rights over 11 million undocumented people, immigrants, are still being challenged. The story of United States history is not one of linear progress, but a one of substantial challenges towards unlocking these certain unalienable rights. In this class, we work together to develop a learning community that is both inclusive and respectful. Our diversity may be reflected in differences in age, culture, race, class, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, ability, and a myriad of other categories. A dedication to inclusiveness in this class requires respecting what others say, their right to say it, and the thoughtful consideration of others' communications. And our students dealt with difficult topics and engaged with emotionally devastating primary sources from the voices of those who were hurt by violence, racism, and discrimination. Students bore witness to the inhumane crimes of the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Second World War. Students read testimonies from the My Lai massacre during the American War in Vietnam, testimonies from both victim and perpetrators, discussing why and how war crimes actually happen and why they're covered up. However, not all of these readings and stories were tragic. The American story has moments of beauty, empathy, triumph, and deep understanding. For instance, take Malcolm X's pilgrimage to Mecca. Quote, "During the past 11 days, here in the Muslim world, I've eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and slept in the same bed or on the same rug, all while praying to the same God, with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white." Within America's deep literary tradition, there are moments of beauty, where students recognize the shared humanity between those we are sometimes taught are really different from ourselves. History has the opportunity to humanize us instead of tearing us apart. While you will see the major challenges within the American story, I hope you can learn today that we've always been more similar than we are different. Thank you very much, and without further ado, we'll have our first presentation up. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine yourselves living your daily normal lives, where you wake up early in the morning, you eat your breakfast together with your family, then the parents go to work, kids go to school, you get tired, you get back home, looking for your comfy beds for a night and rest. Now, how would you feel if that cozy house of yours taken from you, and you get to live forcibly in the middle of the desert, in a barrack? And I also want you to put yourselves in the situation of the Japanese people in Hiroshima. They too were living their normal lives. Then one day, they perished from existence. And wait, there's a delay. Where's the laptop? Oh yeah, can you please? Yeah. Okay, it's here. There's a. Oh yeah, I got you. Okay, now I see. So, in today's lesson, we have three main questions. How did the Americans react to the surprise assault on Pearl Harbor? And how was life for the Japanese Americans during the internment? Third question, what makes the stories of the interned Japanese Americans and the Japanese citizens living in Japan similar? So, starting with the cause of war, Pearl Harbor assault, December 7th, 1941. After the assault, the United States formally declared war on Japan and officially entered the World War II. Now, I have to mention the executive order number 9066. So this executive order justifies the mass relocation of the Japanese Americans. It authorizes the forced removal of the people deemed a national security threat to the nation. Now, using some pictures, I will try to describe to you how was life going during the internment. As you can see, this is Manzanar, a desert. And behind the barracks, you get to see mountains over there. Now, I want you to know that this happened just few days after the assault. And when I talk about forced removal of people deemed a national security threat, I'm talking about all of the citizens who were associated or accessories of the Japanese people. So, regardless if you are a grandparent or parents, children, grandchildren, your age does not matter as long as you are assisted or your ethnicity is related to Japanese people, you'd be taken there forcibly. And let's ask a question. How about the people who had their taxes? Because they are there, they cannot pay their taxes. And because they cannot pay their taxes, they'd be accumulating. Wait. So yeah, there is a picture before it. Okay. The remote is not remoting. Before. Yeah, after the picture, great. So here we have a nurse. She is a Japanese person interned and she was working as a nurse. Yet, let's move to the next picture. Not all of this, what the hell? This remote is not remoting. Okay. Yeah, after. Okay, click. After the nurse. Yeah, here. So this is a warehouse. In this warehouse, we see men working there. And yeah, next. Here we see a Japanese person selling toys, and that madam over there is buying them for their children. Next. Here, that we have seen, now that we have seen the adult people, they are working and being productive. How about the kids? In this picture, we see girls, and they were playing volleyball in the middle of the desert. Next. In that picture, we see the boys, and they were practicing soccer in the middle of the desert also. And I want you to know that during the internment, there were many activities for these people. Activities, sports, leisures, and etc. So, let's move on. Yeah, so Eko Herzi Yoshinaga, she was 17-year-old, ready to be graduated from high school by the time she was interned. Afterwards, she was interviewed in order to talk about her interned days. I splitted the content of the interview into two parts. The first part was after the assault on Pearl Harbor, and the second part is during the internment. So, non-Japanese friends at school didn't know how to treat them. She went to school after the assault on Pearl Harbor, and that's what she said. Now, if their neighbors were too friendly, they would be labeled as Jap lovers. And she felt that she was treated with sort of disdain, her and all of the citizens who were American Japanese people. So, the most painful experience, in her opinion, is being judged on her ethnicity rather than her character as a person. Why? Because these people were looked at aliens, enemy aliens back then. Next. Now, with the second context, regardless of the pictures that I have provided. Maybe you thought that life was not too bad. Sorry to break it down for you, but it was. The living conditions were poor. The barracks were besieged by dust storms every single day. And that makes sense because it was in the middle of the desert anyways. There was a lack of food and water. And who suffered the most from this are the parents having children. They didn't have enough supplies to feed their children. And also, she couldn't believe that people were going to live in a place like that. She describes the moment she arrived to Pearl Harbor by the bus. She said that there was no civilization. I couldn't believe that people were going to live in a place like that. Also, the lack of privacy did a lot of damage in the camps. Wasn't there privacy in the camps? There was. But let me explain to you what she means by this. If somebody sneezed in apartment 1, you will be able to hear that sneeze in apartment 5. If you want to carry on confidential conversations, you will have to carry them outside of the barrack. And the barracks were built with poor quality wood. And just a few days after the assault, so they weren't taken care of. Okay, next. Now, I will leave you with the video talking about Matsushige on the day of the Hiroshima bombing.
Yoshito Matsushige's account of the Hiroshima bombing. I had finished breakfast and was getting ready to go out to the newspaper when it happened. There was a flash from the indoor wires as if lightning had struck. I didn't hear any sound. How shall I say? The world around me turned bright white, and I was momentarily blinded as if a magnesium light had lit up in front of my eyes. Immediately after that, the blast came. I was bare from the waist up, and the blast was so intense, it felt like hundreds of needles were stabbing me all at once. The blast grew large holes in the walls on the first and second floor. I could barely see the room because of all the dirt. I pulled my camera and the clothes issued by the military headquarters out from under the mound of the debris, and I got dressed. I thought I would go to either the newspaper or to the headquarters. That was about 40 minutes after the blast. Near the Miyuki Bridge, there was a police box. Most of the victims who had gathered there were junior high school girls from the Hiroshima Girls Business School and the Hiroshima Junior High School No. 1. They had been mobilized to evacuate buildings and were outside when the bomb fell. Having been directly exposed to the heat rays, they were covered with blisters the size of balls on their backs, their faces, their shoulders, and their arms. The blisters were starting to burst open, and their skin hung down like rugs. Some of the children even have burns on the soles of their feet. They'd lost their shoes and run barefoot through the burning fire. When I saw this, I thought I would take a picture, and I picked up my camera. But I couldn't push the shutter because the sight was so pathetic. Even though I too was a victim of the same bomb, I only had minor injuries from glass fragments, whereas these people were dying. It was such a cruel sight that I couldn't bring myself to press the shutter. Perhaps I hesitated there for about 20 minutes, but I finally summoned up the courage to take one picture. Then I moved 4 or 5 meters forward to take the second picture. Even today, I clearly remember how the viewfinder was clouded over with my tears. I felt that everyone was looking at me and thinking angrily, "He's taking our picture and will bring us no help at all." Still, I had to press the shutter, so I hardened my heart and finally took the second shot. Those people must have thought me duly cold-hearted. Then I saw a burnt streetcar, which had just turned the corner at Kamiya-cho. There were passengers still in the car. I put my foot onto the steps of the car and I looked inside. There were perhaps 15 or 16 people in front of the car. They laid dead on top of one another. Kamiya-cho was very close to the hypocenter, about 200 meters away. The passengers had stripped them of all their clothes. They say that when you are terrified, you tremble and your hair stands on end. And I felt just this tremble when I saw the scene. I stepped down to take a picture, and I put my hand on my camera. But I felt so sorry for these dead and naked people whose photo would be left to posterity that I couldn't take the shot. Also, in those days, we weren't allowed to publish the photographs of corpses in the newspapers. After that, I walked around. I walked through the section of town which had been hit hardest. I walked for close to 3 hours, but I couldn't take even one picture of that central area. There were other cameramen in the Army shipping group and also at the newspaper as well. But the fact that not a single one of them was able to take pictures seems to indicate just how brutal the bombing actually was. I don't pride myself on it, but it's a small consolation that I was able to take at least 5 pictures. During the war, air raids took place practically every night, and after the war began, there were many food shortages. Those of us who experienced all these hardships, we hope that such suffering will never be experienced again by our children and our grandchildren. Not only our children and grandchildren, but all future generations should not have to go through this tragedy. That is why I want young people to listen to our testimonies and to choose the right path, the path that leads to peace.
Back on. So Yoshito Matsushi is a Hiroshima survivor. Yes, because he was targeted by the same bomb anyways. On August 6, 1945, he was 32 years old, and he is known to be the only photographer to capture a first-handed immediate photographic account of the mass destruction of the bomb. Also, his home was 1.7 miles away from ground zero. He miraculously survived, by the way, because that's only 0.2 miles away from assured death. The total destruction covers 1.5 miles. Next. So, did the bomb discriminate between targets? It didn't. Why? Houses were vanished. Hospitals, schools, police departments, fire departments, government agencies, all were vanished via this bomb. Students attend classes on July 27, 1946, with the ruins of Hiroshima surrounding them. That was 1 year after the bombing. Next. This map represents the numbers of the children where their location was during the day of the bombing. Not all of them were at school. Some of these kids were actually working. Mochakawa Primary School, location 1, it is in ground zero. Location 1, 192 children, 100% death. Also, all the 134 students at Firebreak, Clearan, location 3, lost their lives. It was just next to location 1. Next. What makes the stories of internal Japanese Americans and the Japanese civilians in Japan similar? Please click. The answer is simple. They both lived in fear. Why? Because their faith was under the mercy of the US, since they were considered enemy aliens. Next. What do historians have to say about this topic? The casualties from the first bombing are not of a mere historical interest, because they are just a way of how we understand the effects of those nuclear weapons today. And these Japanese people were just objects to justify the weapons and the effect of the bomb. The Nagasaki bomb, 3 days after the Hiroshima bomb, dropped, and that's as a historian right now, personally, that's my opinion. I think that they didn't care about how many people the second bomb would kill, as they just wanted to justify the nuclear weapons on them. Next. This is the moral of the lesson. That's what I want you to learn. I want you to learn that people we study in history are still people, no matter how different you think they are. Because if we don't understand that fact, then history will repeat itself until we learn from our mistakes. Yoshito Matsushige had only one wish by the end of the video. He said that he doesn't want the future generations to experience the same suffering his people had been experiencing. Thank you.
Black Americans have continuously struggled to receive all of the rights that were promised with their citizenship by the United States. The 1950s and 1960s saw Black Americans demand their rights using a variety of new organizational methods. At the same time, policing in Black America only maintained systemic discrimination. Aya Zouali and Abdurrahman Fatih will give an overview of police violence in America during the turbulent 1960s, as well as the responses of Black power organizations like the Black Panthers. So whenever they're ready, give them a round of applause.
Now, please. Behind me, ladies and gentlemen, is the noble act of abolishing slavery, done by none other than Abraham Lincoln. A step towards the future. The 13th Amendment of the Land of the Free makes it unconstitutional for any U.S. citizen to be denied their rights. The right to housing, the right to education, and the right to be treated as a human, except if they were criminals. When you have such a loophole in the Constitution, it serves as a tool to be used for anyone with an agenda. But let's talk numbers, shall we? The US is house for 5% of the world population, but 25% of the world prisoners. In simpler terms, if we took 100 prisoners from all around the world, 25 of them would be Americans. From 1976, the US had a prison population of 300,000. And less than half a century later, and to be exact, 44 years later, that population didn't just double. It didn't just triple or quadruple. It was multiplied by almost 10. Next, please. Next again. In 2016, the US had a prison population of 2.5 million. Does this strike any of you, ladies and gentlemen, as the land of the free? Thank you. No, yeah. But has it always been that way? As historians, I am sure that many of you always hear quotes about history. For example, history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Or, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. But my personal favorite is, to know the present, you should first understand the past. So let's go back in time. Next, please. No, before that. No, after. Yeah, that. The year 1865. The Civil War just ended, and the 13th Amendment was just passed. Two of the major events of the US history. But a third event actually happened. In 1865, the nation's first prison booming just happened. And I will let you, ladies and gentlemen, guess of which race the prisoners were filled. Bingo! Hi. Oh, Reese, how are you? Few years later, the release of the movie Birth of a Nation reshaped the history of the US. The movie Birth of a Nation told the story that white people wanted the US to know about the Civil War, which also led to the rebirth of the KKK, also known as the Ku Klux Klan. For those of you, ladies and gentlemen, who do not know what the KKK is, which is basically a secret organization that is basically meant to just hate on black people, which is mind-boggling if you ask me. Black communities fled from the South to cities like New York, Detroit, and California. And this is what made a new type of terrorizing started. Segregation, Jim Crow. In 1942, a new concept has been introduced, redlining. To put it in simpler terms, in the year 1942, the government wanted to start a new housing program, which was met with a riot from white communities. They refused to let any black person to live in the same community as they did. And the DPD, which stands for Detroit Police Department, the department that was supposed to protect all the rights as Americans, came out with a statement that said, there will be no change in the racial patterns of every neighborhood. Again, there will be no change in the racial patterns of every neighborhood. Does this strike as the land of the free? 1943. All that racial tension led to the riot race, which led to 35 innocent people being killed, 25 of which are black. After all of this, ladies and gentlemen, you would even think or assume that the suffering might have ended or reduced a little bit, but it didn't. 1949, the election of the new mayor of Detroit, Albert Kodo, came out with a new statement. We will put a stop to the Negro invasion of our white neighborhoods. And the white supremacy continued. Next, please. And now to the 1960s, or as many people call it, the cultural decade. In Liverpool, a new band that I am sure many of us know started, which is the Beatles. But in the US, there was a protest. The protest that reshaped everything. The most peaceful protest that probably the US has ever seen. The civil rights movements, led by none other than Martin Luther King, and more than 250,000 people marched peacefully to the streets of Washington. And the first time where we heard the I Have a Dream speech. A few years after that, the Black Panthers started.
Seen back at all the hate and racism black people suffered from, it would only make sense that a movement like the Black Panther Party would exist, right? It would only make sense that they actually fought for this oppression and they hoped to put an end to it. So let me tell you exactly how this formation initiated. Picture this. It's 1966, Oakland, California, when the co-founders, yes, next slide. The co-founders, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, come together to form the Black Panther. Why? Because they were tired of such oppression and they wanted to protect their African American neighborhoods. The Black Panther Party had over 2,000 individuals with notable members. They played a pivotal role. They advocated for social and political changes, and they fought for the 10-point programs, which are the right for education and freedom of speech, the right for full employment, for fair trials, and for military exemption. They also fought for the basic needs and autonomy, which raised the question: if they were asking for all these rights, what rights did they actually have? At that time in Cali, it was legal to openly carry guns, and the Black Panther saw it as an opportunity, and they took advantage of it, not to cause any trouble, but only to ensure that the black folks were treated fairly. They also gave children free breakfast, they run clinic health, and they offered legal aids for their community, which led to them being a source of power, a source of empowerment to their community because it made them feel safe and united. But yet, unfortunately, it didn't go as smoothly as planned because it created tension between the Black Panther Party and the law enforcement authorities, especially after the protest that Abdurrahman talked about. It was a peaceful protest where they openly carried guns just to protest against the new law, which was obviously their right. These actions didn't go really as planned, and they were not in their rights because as soon as they caught the attention of the FBI and the headmaster G. Edward caught the attention of them, they started getting in trouble. They started getting arrested. Yes. Which brings us to the question. Which brings us to the question. Yeah. Did they actually get what they want, or did they all go in vain? Thank you.
Before we end this, ladies and gentlemen, every presentation that will be presented today would be finished with the main goal or the lesson. But Ayan and I wanted to do it differently. Instead of giving you the actual lesson, we wanted to quote Martin Luther King, the I Have a Dream speech. He said, "I have a dream where my 4 children can live in a nation where their skin color won't matter, but they will be judged by the strength of their character." I am 100% sure that I butchered the speech, but thank you so much.
All right. 3 presentations down, a few more to go. We're going to have this presentation on the 1970s, and then there will be a little break for juice and beverages, and you can chat with some of our historians about what they just presented. So, next, the 1970s. The American War in Vietnam is known historically as one of the greatest disasters of United States foreign policy. Over 58,000 American soldiers died during this war that grew increasingly unpopular at home. The 1968 massacre in My Lai is merely one story from this forever war. Huda Lakhzami analyzed primary sources by both victim and perpetrator to help teach us why war crimes occur and how they are covered up. Without further ado, Huda.
Hello. So, Lan, a 10 years old. Lan, a 10 years old Vietnamese kid living in My Lai village. A very peaceful life. He wakes up in the morning to a warm breakfast with his family. He then goes on to help his family with the rice paddies, to playing with his friends next the river bank, and of course sleeps in a warm bed, excited for tomorrow. However, on March 16th, 1968, American soldiers attacked the My Lai village. The women that Lan was familiar with were violated, and his friends were gunned, and the elderly were slaughtered. And did Lan predict that in one day all his family and people would be killed? No. So that is My Lai massacre. We will be talking briefly about the causes and the people who were involved in the massacre. And the second part will be, how does Vietnam remember this massacre that happened during the Vietnam War? And we will reflect on the importance of remembering bad events. Oh, there should be something else. Yeah, never mind. Yeah, just keep it here. So the massacre happened on March 16, 1968. Technically, to put you on context, Vietnam, the south of Vietnam was communist, and the north of Vietnam was anti-communist. And there was a war between the two. So, Lieutenant William Calley was the leader of a platoon troop of Charlie Company that led the massacre. A Charlie Company is a small unit within a military organization that goes for specific military operations. And he led the massacre, claiming that the people in the village were Viet Cong. So Viet Cong is shortened for Vietnamese Cong San, which translates to Vietnamese communists. So he claimed that the people in the village were communists, so they had to be gunned down. He was investigated, and I took these questions from a trial. So he was asked, "What was your feeling when you saw what you did see?" I don't know if I can describe the feelings. It's anger, hate, fear, sick to your stomach, hurt. Now, did you have any remorse or grief or anything? Yes, sir, I did. The remorse for losing my men in the main field. The remorse that these men never had to go to Vietnam. There was a psychological factor of just not being there when everything happened. William Calley was investigated and charged for all his killings. However, and he was actually sentenced for life. It got later reduced to house arrest, and he got released after a year after. So the massacre happened in 1968, and he was released in 1971. The next slide, please. So yeah, the Vietnam War occurred between the Communist North and the South and the anti-communist South Vietnam, which had the U.S. involvement against the communists. And at the same time, Vietnam was suffering from getting its independence from the French. The war started at 1955, ended at 1975, with the victory for Vietnam, the communists. So after the war, it's unified for the the communists, the Viet Cong, to rule the country. Next, please. So the causes of the war, we've got the colonial history. So Vietnam was suffering to get its independence way before the war starts. And there is also the effects of Cold War dynamics. So there was the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the US. The Soviet Union was trying to spread communism, and the US was against it. So Vietnam was the perfect battleground for it. And we've got the domino theory, which explains itself in the picture in the background, which says the fail of one Southeast Asian country to communism would mean it will spread in the whole region. Yep. So the massacre included false allegation. The My Lai village was not communist, and it was simply attacked for nothing. The destruction of property. They've lost their homes, livestock, everything they've owned, and the cover-up attempts. So actually the massacre happened in 1968, but it wasn't discovered to the world until a year after. They tried to conceal it and hide it from the world, but eventually it got exposed. Yep. I've got some eyewitness accounts from soldiers that were at the site. I saw them show a M79 into a group of people who were still alive, but it was mostly done with a machine gun. They were shooting women and children, just like anybody else, said a soldier that wasn't at the attack. We met no resistance, and I only saw the captured weapons. We had no casualties. It's just like any other Vietnamese village. Old Papa Sans, women and kids. As a matter of fact, I don't remember seeing one military-aged male in the place, dead or alive. So now that we have walked through the massacre, I want you to see how does Vietnam remember this war. Next. So, remembering war crimes with an introduction to memorialization. Memorialization is a bridge between the past and the present. It provides us a tangible reminder that the events that happened in the past still affect us in the in the present, and probably in the future as well. And Vietnam did a great job to make a great memorials from the war. And that's through museums. So I tried to pick the most famous museums. The first one is My Lai Massacre Museum, which is also named Son Mai Memorial. It's located in the My Lai village where the massacre happened. So it has artifacts and photographs and survivors' testimonies. As we can see, there is a statue of a woman holding her little baby, and the woman holding her father, probably, trying to resist. Next, please. We have got a memorial of a trench where 170 people were gathered together in the Gund. And yep. The last picture is they have a name of everyone that was slaughtered with the ages. So actually, like, it goes from the oldest to the youngest. So like the oldest is 76 years old and the youngest is like 1 year old. And that's in My Lai Museum. The next museum, it's the War Remnants Museums, was formerly named American War Crime Museum, but they changed the name to remain a more neutral tone. It has everything from since the war started to it ended. So it has the weapons they used, the tactics, pictures of everything, and it's very not for everyone. Next picture, please. So yeah, they have their armor collection. Yep. Photographs for what their chemicals that used and how they affected the people. And yep. A model of how they used to torture people who were falsely or even involved with Viet Cong. So we can see that the significance of museum is very important to preserving the history of Vietnam and how they foster their nationalism. These museums focus on their anti-colonial victories, on the traumas of the war, and how the solidarity of the Vietnamese people got them to where they are today. So these narratives create a very strong bond between people from the past to the people who are living now in Vietnam. So now that we have seen how Vietnamese people learn from their museums, how do you think non-Vietnamese people see this war? The best way I could think of is getting some written notes that were left at My Son Memorial front desk. This is the most horrifying story I have ever heard. We will keep telling the story of My Lai so the world can learn. If My Lai were unique, it would be a tragedy. The appalling truth is that it is but one of many such events. And one American wrote, "As the son of a Vietnam vet, I'm ashamed of what took place there." So, the moral of the presentation is, it's good to remember the past. It honors the people who survived it. We tend to avoid talking about the bad events that happened, but sometimes we just need to acknowledge it and take a step to the future. Thank you.
Hi, hope you're all doing good. So, before starting my presentation, I would like to ask you a question first. In which country do you think women have more rights? The United States or Morocco? If you think it's the US, please raise your hands. Good. Who thinks it might be Morocco? Actually, you're right. It's Morocco. And I was quite surprised when I found out about it at first, too. Can you please go to the next slide? And I don't think it's working. Is it? Okay. So, because of this problem, American women wanted to implement the 19th Amendment into the American Constitution. The 19th Amendment, in brief, revolves around the fact that there should be no discrimination in terms of voting between the two genders, men and women. Next. Let's go to the other side of the world, Morocco. Morocco, on the other hand, has this article. It's the 19th article of the Moroccan Constitution of 2011. It guarantees the population in general. It guarantees equality for both men and women, not just in voting, but also equality in terms of economic equality, financial equality, social equality, and so on. The ERA. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before. So basically, the ERA stands for the Equal Rights Amendments. This Equal Rights Amendments was proposed to the Constitution in 1923 with the sole purpose of stopping the distinguishment between men and women in voting. And they also defended the fact that there should be equality between men and women in employment, property, and divorce. Yes. Who wanted the ERA? The ERA, we cannot talk about it, and people who wanted it without mentioning two main names: Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman, since both of them were the ones who wrote this amendment. This is a picture of Alice Paul. And who is Alice Paul? So Alice Paul is a feminist, a women's rights activist. She's like the first leader who supported the fact of implementing the 19th Amendment, and she was the one who wrote it, as we've seen with her co-writer. Why wasn't the ERA ratified by its original deadline? So within a year, 30 out of 38 necessary states acted for ratification. The problem was that some conservative activists, mainly Phyllis Schlafly, were doing some great job to stop this ERA movement from spreading. This is a picture of Phyllis Schlafly, and she's one of the most famous conservative activists and anti-feminist women. Who is Alice Schlafly? It might seem odd at first that like two women who are from the same gender and they have like different interests and they're standing into different backgrounds. So Phyllis Schlafly was against Alice Paul. Alice Schlafly is a conservative activist. On the other hand, she's a commentator, author, and she's a successful person who led the campaign to stop the ERA movement in the US, and that was in the 1970s. Alice Schlafly had a belief. That belief was that women in general has a privilege that men don't have, which is the ability to have kids, look after a family, and raise them. So she was defending the fact that women should not seek equality, because equality will not just concern some certain aspects of life and neglect the other. If we guaranteed equality in terms of voting, women might have also to do military work, serve in the military, go to war, and this is not something that women would like to. This is an example of the posters that conservative activists were making to protest against the ERA. Why did the ERA fail? So, the Congress has given a 7-year deadline for the ratification of the ERA. However, those anti-feminist groups did really great job, and they kept supporting their campaign. So it slowed down the process, and it led to defeat the feminist movements. The gender pay gap. The gender pay gap, in simple terms, it's the difference between the earnings of men and women. According to statistics, for example, this one, we can notice that in 1982, for each dollar a man earned, a woman would get only 65% of it. In 2002, for each dollar, 80% of it. 2022, 82% of it. So it's true that it has been increasing over time, but yet it has never been equal. So as we can see that 2022 is a recent year and still women are not being paid equally to men. Also, we can notice that from 2002 to 2022, which is a 20-year gap of age, it has only increased by 2%, which is a slow pace. This is my resources list. And thank you so much for your attention.
All right, we are now on to the 1990s, getting closer and closer to the present. So, the world is growing smaller and smaller every day, and this change was accelerated after the end of the Cold War. The North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA, removed trade barriers between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Adam El-Maliki and Adam Buka will be investigating the consequences of offshoring labor by looking at American companies that produce in countries like Vietnam and Bolivia. Without further ado.
Just do it. We all have heard about this slogan, Nike slogan. Nike, formerly known as Blueprint Sport, is a global leader in athletic products. It produces a lot of accessories, a lot of items, a lot of labels in sports. It's a company that is financially affluent, that her income goes up about 6 billion in a year, which means that they have a lot of stores, a lot of factories all around the world that contribute in this income. But let's dig a little bit in these factories. According to All American organization, we found that we have in USA, or states, 35 factories in the US, which means 6.4% of its global factory account. And also, we have 5,430 workers, which means 0.5% of its workforce in US. I'm bad at math too, but it means that 94.6% of the risk in overseas of its factories and 95% of the workforce overseas. Which push us to question ourselves.
How come a US company that brands its product as a national one, yet most of its production sites are located overseas? Well, a question that spikes curiosity, a question with many answers, and that will be the Triangle Sweatshirt Incident Factory. This very incident is remarkable as it is remembered as one of the, if not the deadliest, incident in the U.S. fact in the U.S. history. It happened or it occurred on March 25th of the year 1911. Now, this incident, it isn't directly correlated to the choice of setting of Nike, but it is remembered as one of the most pivotal moments in the U.S. history, as it led to many regulations, one of which would be the Labor Code of Work of New York State. Besides, local government and unions have contributed and have conducted monitored conditions in working factories, beside placing measurements to avoid fire. So these very conditions and these very changes, will they be relevant to this choice? Probably not. So how come? Now we have a country A and a country B. So let's dive into, for an instance, a mind of a business owner. Now country A have a unified union that backed by the government, beside a huge media coverage, which means a restrictive environment for profit, as you're facing a lot of risks and you're risking, and there is a huge possibility that you could lose your money, as you have to satisfy a certain conditions in order to establish your business. Now country B is a country that is known for its deficient economical system. It means that people there living in a critical condition. So behind the mask of free opportunity for a job, for better than life, you can control your own environment to set your business in the conditions that you control, which means you control the production, thus the profit, with less risks. Now, as a business owner, how would you have the choice to choose between the country A, in which you started your company, and the country B? And that would be thanks to the NFTA Act. This NFTA Act stands for the North American Free Trade Act, established by the 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton, in 1993. This very act has led to a lot of changes when it comes to this possibility. It was the key for the globalization that we sustain and we are witness of today. Now, in Bill Clinton's speech, we find that, according to Bill Clinton, NFTA will tear down trade barriers between our three nations. And it did, in fact, as it offered more than 200,000 jobs opportunities per year. As of 2016, there is almost 6 million jobs opportunities. But as in life, nothing is perfect, and there is always imperfection, as it is in business. And so this NFTA Act has been criticized a lot, and one of which we found according to Scott, NFTA and other trade deals are designed to create separate global set of rules. How so? By protecting foreign investors, to encourage foreign investments, and enhancing and promoting outsourcing products. Now that we understood the choice of setting, we have to dig deep down on these countries that are affected by these opportunities, or so-called, and one of which we would find the Nike shoe plan in Vietnam. Now, Vietnam, as we should know, in 1975, just got out of a war. And if we know anything about a country after war, is that it suffers from a crippled economy that is exploited by foreign investments as measurements, or as promoting the opportunity and the better life conditions. Now, workers in Vietnam works more than 65 hours a week and gets paid $10 per week. Now, if we do the calculation, an approximately amount, they make about $30, and the pair of shoe of Nike itself costs $130, which is crazy, because you literally are the pillar of a company that produces a shoe that is sold with $130, yet you don't even make half of that. The biggest problem is the working conditions. How so? Now, toluene is a carcinogen. It's a toxic gas, and it has been a lot of studies that show that in Vietnamese factories, the regulated percentage that should be existent in this very condition will be about 6 or 177 times that is actually existent in these factories. And it showed that this very gas can affect the respiratory and the nervous system beside the liver. And there has been studies that showed almost 77% of these workers that suffered from respiratory problems itself. We have a video that's going to demonstrate or give a quick overview about the conditions or the working conditions in Vietnam. Basically, imagine a video that it's 1 minute length that gives a quick overview over the what's called exploitation of the Vietnamese workers. They're submitted to dangerous conditions, one of which will be being treated poorly and discriminated. They're not given shifts, and they could possibly lose their 20% of their salary if they took a 5 minute rest in this production. That's it. So now that we described the video that was supposed to be watched, we're gonna move to one of the examples of other countries that are being exploited.
Hopefully you imagined that video. Anyways, we have two examples of workers that really suffered from this working. We have Layan and Sadisha. Starting from Layan, she's a mother of 2 children, and her wage was $224. And don't worry, I'll take care about the calculations. Her rent is about $15, and for milk and diapers, $90. Food, $162, and daycare, $67, which means $373, which means that she needs extra $149. Again, her mother has back pain. Whenever her mother calls her and asking for her to pay her bills, she always turned down her request. And she said that it's like betraying your family. Another case, which is Sadisa, she's a young girl that works 63 hours and gain only 3 extra cents. Also, she was called a D-show. It's a word that you don't want to know what it means. But after all that, of course, Nike was pushed to do a solution for this problem. And she launched a Girl Effect campaign in 2008 under the name of empowering and preparing girls to work in the key to lifting the developing world out of the situation as a solution for this problem. And as this question has been made, they give high position managerial for 2 women that they have an extensive media exposure, such as Maria Ethel. She is an advisor, media advisor of Bush, and Hannah Jones. And by the way, this campaign has been endorsed and supported by high organizations such as the World Bank, the USAID, the UNICEF, etc. There's no video, no worry.
So the motto of this company that it stood for, or the purpose, the motto is just do it. Just do it is simple, effective, and inspiring. It stimulates and motivates people to dream and that there is nothing that they can achieve. Yet, this very company that stands to promote working and achieving things can even supply the main demands that are included in human rights, how hypocritical as it sounds. And this company is not even in needing money. It roughly generated, in 1975, it generated over $800 million from 9.2 billion sales alone. Now the thing is, I'm not saying that you shouldn't seek profit. I mean, every institution has the right to seek profit. But the thing is, profit is important as competition is fundamental. But as social inclusion and investing in social and in workers means investing in something that gives back in a way that is not that is priceless and have a huge social impact, and that should be itself the goal of every company, is not only have the facet of a profitable company but also a company that make a huge impact on the society. Thank you.
Okay. So we are at our last decade for the student presenters today. We are ending with the 2000s before we have an excellent special guest presentation by Dr. Karim Bejjit, all the way from Tetuan. But before that, let's talk about the 2000s. The terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001, not only altered New York City's skyline forever, but it also decimated the sense of security within the United States. Insecurity sometimes led to hate that was directed against Muslim and Arab Americans. Nevertheless, 97% of Muslim Americans agree that they are proud to be Muslim, while 92% agree that they are proud to be American, according to the Pew Research Center. In this presentation, Yasmin Zuhairi looks into the modern experience of Muslim Americans. Without further ado.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful evening. In my presentation, I'm going to talk about what does it mean to be a Muslim in America. During this presentation, we're going to talk about 4 points: the Vermont hate crime, when did it start, safety measures in the USA after 9/11, and proud Muslim Americans. The Vermont hate crime. November 25th, 2023. 3 Palestinian students at the University of Vermont were shot, severely injured. The shooter was pleaded not guilty. The motives for this crime are very obvious. Unfortunately, their families thought the USA would be a safer place. Does this kind of crime remind you of something happening in the recent months? Show hands if you agree. Now let's go back to when the real terror started. I'm sure you all know 9/11. I don't need to evoke it again. 3,000 lives were lost. I'm going to talk about Ali. Dearborn, Michigan is one of the largest concentrations of Muslim population in the USA. 40% of its population is Muslim from Arab origins. Ali, a kid living there, evokes the feelings that he felt after the terrorist attack and what his mother felt. And I quote, "The look on my mother's face. She knew what was next. She knew it was going to be hard for us as Muslims in America." Unfortunately, the hate crimes against Muslims in the USA escalated rapidly. From 28 crimes reported in the 2000s to 481 crimes reported in 2001. Now, is the USA a safer place after the Patriot Act? The Patriot Act was legislated in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks to make the USA a safer place. It legally expanded the reach of federal authorities, which means the FBI and the government can legally spy on your devices. And it also strengthened TSA, Transportation Security Administrations, in airports. And ironically, the Iraq War, which happened in 2003 to remove mass destruction weapons from the region. Thousands of fatalities, yet no weapons found. Now, do you think the USA is a safer place now? Show hands if you agree. You don't. Now let's talk about Muslims proud to be American. As you can see here, there are statistics. You could probably guess that Muslims do not feel safe or would not go out loud about being Muslim. They are very proud. You can see 92% are very proud to be Muslims in America. And to end this presentation on a positive note, I want to remind you all, Muslim Americans have contributed significantly across various fields, from science and technology to art and culture, while maintaining their religious beliefs and identity. They embrace their heritage with positive hearts, fostering interfaith dialogue, understanding that strengthens the fabric of our society. And my presentation has come to an end. Thank you so much for your attention.
All right, everyone. We are introducing our special guest for the evening, our keynote speaker. Can everyone give a round of applause for Dr. Karim Bejjit? Dr. Karim Bejjit is a professor of English and American Studies at Abdelmalek Assadi University, Tetuan, Morocco, and coordinator of the doctoral program, New Trends in Linguistic, Literary, and Cultural Studies. Previously, he taught English and American literatures for 16 years at University Hassan II in Casablanca, where he chaired the Moroccan American Studies Research Laboratory. He earned a postdoc Fulbright Visiting Scholar grant twice in 2022 and in 2011, and a research fellowship from the Netherlands Institute of Advanced Study in the summer of 2007. He was a visiting lecturer at several colleges and universities in Georgia, United States, during February to March 2009. In 2013 to 2014, he taught an English course. He taught English literature and literary criticism at Tabuk University, Saudi Arabia. He is the author of English colonial texts on Tangier, 1661 to 1684, Imperialism and the Politics of Resistance. His other popular publications include a book on the 19th century European travel discourse on Morocco, a volume of short stories, and several book chapters and peer journal articles in English and Arabic. He is currently working on a transnational documented history of United States-Moroccan relations, 1776 to 1961. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Karim Bejjit.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I would like first to thank Mr. Reese Hollister and Director Michael Macmillan, and Rehan for being such a kind host and for making this a pleasant journey. And I would like to congratulate the students. I really enjoyed your presentations. They were rich, diverse, and they complemented one another. So without much ado, I know I have only 3 hours, and I want to walk you through almost over 2 decades, actually. Sorry, 2 centuries. And I titled my PowerPoint presentation along the lines of your talks and papers. So I'll try to be as brief as possible, but if there are any questions towards the end, if we spare time for that, it would be ideal. I also have a 5-6 minutes video that, in a sense, complements the things that I'll be talking about. So what do you see here? First, what you see here is a map that I took from Wikipedia. What you see is the United States and Morocco. Back in 1776, Morocco is much bigger than the US. But more or less, I would say Morocco is slightly bigger in terms of size, in terms of geography. The question is, what brought these 2 countries together? They have almost every reason not to be on close terms. Geography is a good factor. They're separated by a huge ocean. And then in terms of political system, they're at variance, culturally, linguistically, almost every reason you can think of that makes them quite apart. But I would like to contest the very principle that geographical distance is a reason or factor for countries and cultures to be separate. And think of the other opposite. Here is a neighboring country on which we are not on good terms at the present. And historically, we have always had very strange relations with our neighbors. And that applies almost to all European countries, England and France, England and Germany, France and Germany, and lots of other countries across the world. Okay, next slide, please. So let's take the story back to the late 70s. In 1776, Declaration of Independence, the 13 colonies wanted to establish their own independent country. And it's easier said than done. They had to wage a 7-year war, very destructive war, very chaotic war in all sorts of terms. And around this time, in 1777, the end of 1777, December, the Sultan, I'm going to say a few things about him in a minute, decided to open his ports to this new country that he barely heard about. He heard about it from all sorts of merchants that were established in the port city, the Atlantic city of Morocco. And so he was well informed about world politics against the idea that we get that this world is enclosed upon itself. North Africa had nothing to do with the so-called civilized world and was not in tune with what was going on. This is a big falsification of history, and it goes along the line of having to revisit and revise and question. So he decided that, along with a number of other countries, and I have a list of them here, and you'll be surprised at all these countries that didn't have consular representation in Morocco were invited to trade with in Moroccan ports, to engage in trade. And these countries included Russia, Germany, Prussia, Hungary, and many other countries, Malta, etc. Let's talk a little bit about this Sultan Mohammed bin Abdullah. He came at an opportune moment, and I see a lot of similarities between Mohammed bin Abdullah and Mohammed Sadis. They have more or less the same vision, and now we're talking more about the Atlantic in the last few months. That's also the vision of Mohammed bin Abdullah. Now, he's the grandson of Moulay Ismail, and Moulay Ismail was a powerful sultan. He was the one who established the modern Moroccan state. We can give credit to the Saadi Sultan Ahmed al-Mansur for establishing a a solid central government, but we, like almost 70 years later, Moulay Ismail came to supplement that work and to build a strong institution, including, or perhaps principally, the military establishment or apparatus. And with that, he was able, and it's a controversial issue in Moroccan history, that he was able to subdue all the dissident, rebellious regions in Morocco. We're now engaging in a wave of revising our social history and moving away from the sort of official archives and bringing light into all those, peripheral regions and all those local histories. So that's in the process, it's changing the view about those earlier centuries. But there was a problem after his death. He reigned for a long period, for I think 58 years, from 1672 to 1727. When he died, that military organ became the cause of instability in Morocco. And for the next 30 years, they will wreak havoc in the country. They will rebel, they will create a lot of turmoil in the country. They will name the sultans, they will remove the sultans. For example, the father of this sultan was removed 6 times and placed back on the throne. And during this time, this young sultan, who had been to pilgrimage with his grandmother, the wife of Sultan Moulay Ismail, and had a sense of what is going on. And as a prince, he lived in Asafi, and then he became prince, the viceroy in Marrakesh. And then he had all the questions going through his mind and decided that we have to find a different approach. And this approach was trade. And for that, he had a whole strategy. So I tried to summarize some of his achievement. He unified the country, so he piecemeal, gradually got rid of that military organ, disbanded them, disempowered them slowly, and then that's what I'm talking about, revitalized the Mahsen. And then he rebuilt the navy, because during those 30 chaotic years, there was some sort of corsair activity which obviously did not serve the purpose of the central government. And then he established diplomatic relations with a number of countries. And if you move to the next slide, what you see here is the feat, the main achievement of Sultan Mohammed bin Abdullah, the city of Mogador, or city of Essaouira, which he built almost from scratch. There was a city, there was a town there, but he built a modern city by the standards of the late 18th century. And then he invited all merchants to come from Agadir, from all sorts of towns and cities, to come and establish their bases, their factories, their houses in the city of Essaouira. So in very few years, the city of Essaouira became very prosperous city. And for that, he did a lot of incentives and signed the treaty that I mentioned. And it is around this time, so the treaties that he signed in a very short period of time. I'm taking too long here, but it's just the basis of what comes after. 1760 with Britain, 1763 with Sweden, with Venice and France in 1765. And you could think of 1777 when he invited these new nations that were not represented in his country to come and establish formal relations. Well, probably he didn't know what was going in the States in detail, because it was equally chaotic. The 7 years, it was not even clear whether the Americans would be able to get their free nation as they hoped. So the war ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. And during that time, the Sultan kept insisting on the Americans to send an envoy, to send an ambassador to his court in Marrakesh. Well, there were 2 courts, one in Marrakesh, one in Fez. And so in 1780, Congress responded to the overtures of the Sultan by acknowledging his good intentions and saying that we'll try as soon as we can. Well, 1784, the Sultan seemed to be a little bit angry, and he ordered Moroccan corsairs to attack American vessels. Going through the Mediterranean without treaty, you are somehow like legal target. But in 1786, now if we can move on to the next slide, in 1786, well, towards the end of 1785, this man, Thomas Barclay, who was an American consul in Paris, remember, the treaty now is signed with the French, with the British. The American ambassadors, they were called ministers, Thomas Jefferson in Paris and John Adams, both of them would become presidents of the United States, decided to send this man, Thomas Barclay. And this is actually the cover of a book written by Priscilla Roberts, who was a librarian in the American legation. She did an excellent job at the American legation several years ago. And she wrote this excellent book based on all sorts of archive in the Netherlands where this man was based. And it's a good chapter on his trip to Morocco and how he experienced Morocco and how he led the negotiations to the Treaty of June 1786. It's a treaty that is considered the oldest unbroken treaty signed between the United States and a foreign country. Extraordinary. Well, there were treaties before, the one with France and the one with Britain, but they were broken afterwards. This one remained in power until 1756. That's why it's considered to be a solid token of these lasting relationships between the US and Morocco. And it has 25 articles. We look at some of them. This is the document signed by John Adams, the last part of the treaty signed by John Adams in London and Thomas Jefferson in Paris. It was ratified a year afterwards in the US, ratified by Congress. Okay, next slide, please. So some of the articles I would like to look at, and I may be taking too long because I have a lot to say on the next pages that are equally important and interesting. So this is Article 10, it's very important. It says that if any vessel or ship shall have an engagement with a vessel belonging to another country within the forts of Moroccan port, the vessel so engaged shall be defended and protected as much as possible until she's in safety. So, for example, the British, imagine the British are still in war against Americans, and there's a British warship in Mogador. The Sultan will not allow the British ship to, attack within the bay or outside. So 24 hours, I think. And the next thing, that's what I wanted to show you this. We're happy that Donald Trump in December, before he left office, recognized the sovereignty of Morocco over the southern provinces. But actually, and some historians have also argued this way. If you look at this article, you could see here that if any American vessel shall be cast on shore, shipwrecked, that is, the coast of Wed Noon or any coast thereabout, we are responsible for protecting and assisting the said ship and the said sailors. That means you recognize our authority and sovereignty over those. And there has been this argument that maybe Trump's recognition is superfluous if we actually want to use this argument. Anyway, there are two more articles that I just want to show you, but the whole treaty is available online if you want to see it. It is a very liberal treaty because it almost accorded everything that Barclay wanted. And the idea was to encourage the American to come and trade in Morocco along with the other countries. Next slide, please. Yeah. So these are two more important, perhaps some of the four most important articles in the whole treaty. So giving guarantee to American citizens or American subjects, they were called, in in Morocco, and giving the consul, the American consul, the authority to protect them and take care of their business. The next slide, please. Okay, so this is the letter signed by the Sultan to the, not to the president, because that's a mistake that we see in some of the books or the articles that are written about U.S.-Moroccan relations. This was addressed to the President of Congress, not to the President of the United States, because the President of the United States took power in 1789. You know, for the next 6 years, the Americans didn't have a president, okay? From independence, formal independence, the Treaty of Paris, until 1789, there was no elected president. Congress took care of the business, and the president of the Congress, or Congress, was, in a sense, a virtual president. So this was addressed from the Sultan Mohammed bin Abdullah to the president of U.S. Congress. And much later, when, and there is a sad story to say here, when George Washington took office, he sent this letter. It's a very famous letter, and you find it all in all sorts of places in social media. I don't know if you can expand this. Can you see this here? No. Can we expand that a little bit? If we can. If not, I can read it. If not, I can read it for you. I am interested in the last part here. Okay. Yes, so, okay. Excellent, thank you. The encouragement which your majesty has been pleased generously to give to our commerce with your dominions, the punctuality with which you have caused the treaty with us to be observed, and the just and generous measures taken in the case of Captain Proctor, forget about Pike, make a deep impression on the United States and confirm the respect and attachment to your imperial majesty. If you read the opening, that's not the situation, it's not the case. And he was complaining about Barbary states, Algiers and Tripoli. And the United States will engage in war with Tripoli from 1801 to 1805, and then with Algiers, before it became Algeria, in 1816. Now, the sad part of it is that this letter never reached the Sultan. The Sultan died a few months later, and there is nothing in the records that says we received this letter. So that's the sad thing, that he did everything to help the states to become partners, but he never get an official recognition of that from the President of the U.S. Next slide, please. Now we'll zip forward to 1821. 1821, this is Sultan Moulay Slimane, the son of Sultan Mohammed bin Abdullah. And this is a fragment from a letter by Consul John Maloney. Now let's talk a little bit about consuls. The first one, Barclay, actually he was Irish, and when I met the Irish ambassador, when I talked about Thomas Barclay, American consul, he said, he is Irish. And I said, no, he's in a capacity, in official capacity, he was American. But obviously there were a lot of consuls that have different nationalities other than American. But Barclay was American when he was sent. And so the next consul, James Simpson, was Scottish. And he remained Scottish all along. He was in Gibraltar, and then he took office. He became a consul in Tangier. He died, and then he was succeeded by an American, John Maloney. And so John Maloney arrived in Tangier, and they were, according to the norms and rituals, the governor of Tangier was instructed to help and assist the new consul in all sorts of possible ways. Then he did something else. This is a part of the letter. I don't have to read it, but the substance of it is that today the Sultan Moulay Ismail arrived in Tangier. He had his own domestic problems, facing dissent again. But when he arrived in Tangier and met with consuls, he met John Maloney, and he gave orders that give this man a piece of land and a house, free of rent. You don't have to collect any rent from him. And this house became the property of the United States. And it became, next slide please, it became this building, the American Legation of Tangier. Now the American Legation is actually two houses that are brought together, one on one side of the street and the other on the other side. But the main one was the ground where numerous consuls worked and served. And so this has become the official American consulate in Morocco for a long period of time, until 1756. Well, let's say in the 40s, under French occupation, they had other places like in Rabat here, they had offices here, but this was the main office, the main diplomatic building. Then, much later, after independence, the American embassy was established in Rabat, and this ceased to have any official character, and later on it turned into an institute. Now it's a research institute and a museum. Have you been to the American Legation? Raise your hands. Okay, it's an excellent place, and there you have a library, a specialized library in the Maghreb region. If you're looking for books on the 19th century, 18th century archival documents, you'll find them here. Okay, they celebrated 2 centuries like a couple of years ago. Next slide, please. All right, we move on. It's around the same time, talking about U.S.-Moroccan relations, and you're probably familiar with the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, associated with President Monroe, it states that America will have no patience for European governments, monarchies, to interfere in the revolutions taking place in Latin America or across Southern America. Because you could see here republicanism versus monarchism. They wanted this part of America, this Western Hemisphere, to be the backyard of America, in a sense. It's also a statement of power. On the other hand, they are willing to cease interfering in European domestic affairs, European wars. There was nothing to be gained from all those wars between different European states. And that applied to their ambitious colonial designs. So as we'll see in the case of Morocco, gradually throughout the 19th century, there was aggressions against Moroccans and North Africans in general. Americans just watched. And through their correspondence, consuls were obviously criticizing what they saw. Writing to the Department of State, they were not happy, and I had the chance to go through some of those archives, and actually since 2001 they have been put online. All of these consular dispatches now you can access online. National Archives have made that possible. Okay, so this is just a letter. It's difficult to read, but the substance of which is the president writing back to Sultan Abdurrahman, another sultan, the nephew of Moulay Suleiman, saying that we cannot interfere in your problems or conflict with France. Okay, so that's the standard policy of the United States in Europe and in Africa. Next slide. So there are 2 major events, catastrophic events, sorry. The Battle of Isly and the Battle of Tétouan. Well, let's say aggression, because the battle means like the 2 equal entities fighting, and one loses and one wins. But that's not the case. The French attacked Morocco because they were tired of Moroccan support of our friends, Algerian, the Emir Abdelkader, if you've heard of Emir Abdelkader, who was waging a war of resistance. So he came to hide, and sometimes seek support, but very often that entailed, some sort of consequence. And the worst was in 1844 when the French defeated the Moroccan army. It was a catastrophic defeat. And actually, it was a benchmark. It was a watershed. That's the beginning of the end of sovereign imperial Morocco. And then 15 years later, my city where I grew up, I was born elsewhere, but somehow I feel I'm connected to all sorts of places. I spent 16 years in Casablanca, so I feel much at home in Casablanca as elsewhere. But Tétouan was invaded, literally. Spanish troops invaded the entire city of Tétouan, and they stayed there for over 9 months. And they controlled life. It's, like modern army facing civilians. And so they were convinced to withdraw by the British, but with a high cost to the Moroccan treasury. So we had to pay debt for the next 25 years, paying the Spanish for something that obviously is quite trivial, frictions on the borders leading to invasion. Next slide, please. Now, the Americans watched, and we can understand a lot. Now, I can see this to historians, future historians. American archives are so important when it comes to domestic history because they are not writing from the vantage point of wanting to colonize, okay, or resisting colonialism. They were just there observing and watching and writing to their higher authorities, the Department of State, describing in minute detail everything that happened, as if you are living among them. The people they met, the conversations, the situations, the weather, the casualties, the ships that came to the Bay of Tangier, the news about the interior of Morocco. So if you keep reading this for the 70 years, you'll have a full sense. I'm not saying the full truth. The truth is always impossible to retrieve. But anyway, so I was talking about Americans, non-interference, Monroe Doctrine, but they were involved somehow in a couple of things. One was back to the 1820s when they became part of a health council established by Moulay Abdurrahman in the 1820s. And then much later, and that's very important, have you been to this place? Again, Cap Spartel, it's a nice place. There's a nice restaurant. Now you can go there, have some pizza, spend the whole day. But Cape Spartel has a wonderful history, and I wrote about it in my blog. I used to have a blog. I ceased to write. It's over a decade, I think, since I dropped the line. But I was interested in Moroccan history, cultural history, and I was interested in this. I did some search and tried to concentrate all that information on the Cap Spartel. But again, the tons of archival documents and how it came about, the idea. And believe it or not, the first man to suggest it was an American, was the guy, Maloney, if I remember, the one who was given the house. He was the one to say, the strait is a very perilous space and there are a lot of shipwreck, and so we better do, erect a lighthouse. But nobody paid attention, and much later, some 10 countries, European countries, and the United States, 9 European countries and the United States, and Morocco decided to give it a go. And they built this, and it started operating in 1865. And there is an agreement, an official agreement, which, if you look at the old pictures on Google, you find a lot of old pictures in travel book in the 19th century of this place. So there were like 4 soldiers, Moroccan soldiers, guarding it. But for the payment, for the maintenance of the lighthouse, all of the 10 countries, the 9 European in the United States, paid something like $280 a year annually. So they had to pay it for the maintenance and the payment of the soldiers and al-Qaid. There was Qaid also supervising the security. Next slide, please. Now we move into 1904. I'm jumping, trying to get as close to the present as possible. Theodore Roosevelt, right? Not Franklin Roosevelt. This is an earlier, I think, an acquaintance of Franklin D. Roosevelt. This is Ahmed Raisuni or Raisuli, and this is Ian Perdicaris. It's a long story. I don't think I have time to tell you about the details, but this man here kidnapped this man here, and this man here got so angry and threatened to invade Morocco. And it was part of an electoral campaign, as usual. It's business. So he was in the middle of his re-election when he got news of 1 May 1904, barely 1 month after the signing of the ominous treaty, the Entente Cordiale between the French and the British, just 1 month, whereby the British says, okay, we're no longer going to defend Morocco. Go ahead, do whatever you want to do with Morocco. And same thing for Egypt. The French, again, relinquished all sorts of resistance to British imperial designs in Egypt. I was two counting states, as usual, collaborating. And so what happens is that just 1 month after that, Ahmed Raisuli attacked Villa Aidunia. Have you been to Villa Aidunia? It's not very far from the Cape Sparto. If you've been there, you know, go to the villa of Perdicaris. Sorry, Perdicaris, because this is another villa, Villa Harris. That's a different one. A British journalist in the late 19th, early 20th century. So Ian Perdicaris, very briefly. Fascinating figures, I know, but this is the son of a Greek citizen who immigrated to America and married an American woman from the southern states before the Civil War. Now, when the Civil War came, you know, there were divided feelings, pro-North, pro-South. So they decided that this young man, Ian Perdicaris, should leave because he was likely to enlist in one army or the other. And so he didn't want to join any of the parties, the warring parties. So he migrated to Europe. He went to England and wooed some physicist wife with her son, and they come and lived in Tangier in the 1870s. Crazy story. And Tangier is full of crazy stories and crazy individuals. This was the wealthiest man in Tangier in the 1880s, 1890s, and even a decade after that. When he was kidnapped by Perdicaris, he was an aged man. So he was kidnapped for almost a month. And Raisuli, to tell his story very quickly, Raisuli had his own problems. He was put in jail. In the city of Mogador, you know, there's a tiny island where there is a famous prison. So he was there, I think, for 2 years, if I remember. And then he was released. And so he came back, and he was full of hatred, full of revenge. And he was making demands, and he wanted to attack those which caused his incarceration. That is a relative of his own tribe who was the Basha of Tangier. So he decided to sabotage his work, and he attacked and kidnapped Perdicaris with his British son. And you know, there's a movie if you're interested, but the movie has nothing to do with the real story. The Wind and the Lion, starring Sean Connery, 1975. Very good movie. Sean Connery at his best, if you want. Acting a Raisuni, but has nothing to do with the real Raisuni. He turned him into a romantic figure, and instead of Perdicaris, there was a lovely lady that was kidnapped. So forget about the real story. Anyway, so I don't want to take too long. Eventually, he released Perdicaris, but he got $70,000 from Sultan Moulay Abdelaziz. You probably have heard about Sultan Moulay Abdelaziz. The situation was chaotic. We are at the end of the century. Morocco has lost grip on its different regions. The French have actually put so much pressures. They've already taken important parts of our eastern borders. So this was causing more trouble. And so they responded to his demands. And that's when you see the state cannot even impose itself on all those troublesome figures. Now, there's another aspect to it. I have to tell you this. One of my colleagues is the grandson, the direct grandson of Reis Sunni. And I didn't know. When I moved to Tétouan a few years ago, I know that he has the same name, but I thought like it's a big tribe of Reis Sunni. But then one day he says, this guy, the professor from the Arabic department, is his direct grandson. So I got in touch with him. And I said, I have a lot of material, and I want to rewrite the story, because he's always the villain in the story. Forget Sean Connery's. But there might be other aspects to the story that are not brought to our attention. And he said he has some archives, and then he took me to his house, Tangier, to his aunt's house, the direct daughter, a very aging woman, that's around 90-something. I met with her, and we talked a little bit. She still remembers, the earlier decades. So next slide, please. Now we move into the modern 20th century, middle of the 20th century. 1942, you all know about the efforts to win World War II, and the troops, the landing, the Operation Torch. Americans landed forces along the coast in all of these cities, and this was part of the strategy to, fight the Germans. So they landed, British and American troops were landed in North Africa, and there was some resistance from the French authorities, pro-Vichy, but they eventually were able to defeat them and take control of Morocco. They established their bases in Morocco, and so we'll see the Americans landing, but also remaining for the next couple of decades. Next slide. Another interesting story to tell. You probably have seen this picture before. So Franklin Roosevelt arrived in Casablanca through a long detour. He didn't travel straight away across the ocean. He traveled to South America, Brazil, I think, and then to Africa. And then from Africa, he landed in Tangier in January. And much later, was it 21 or 23rd? I can't remember the dates, but I have them here. Like 10 days after, he decided to invite Sultan Mohammed Khamis, Mohammed V. Now, the treaty signed, the Protectorate signed the treaty in 1912. It has about 9 articles, if I remember. And one of these articles stated that in terms of foreign relations, the Sultan will have the father of this Sultan and the successors will have no right to contact foreign heads of state. So foreign policy was taken completely over by the French. That's like insulating Moroccans, and the Moroccan authorities will have no contact with the external world. And Franklin Roosevelt reversed that policy. He arrived, and then he wanted to meet the chief of the place. Obviously, the Sultan remains the highest officer, if you like, in Morocco, even with the Résident Général needs the signature of the Sultan. He didn't decide the policies, but he needed the signature of the Sultan all along. So he decided to invite the Sultan Mohammed Khamis, used to be called Sultan. After independence, we call King Mohammed Khamis. And that's against the wishes of the French authorities and the British as well, those imperial nations. And an interesting story, as I said, because it's in Franklin Roosevelt's son's story called Elliot Roosevelt's As He Saw It. He would tell you more about this evening if you want to look for the book. Am I boring you? So anyway, this is Prince Hassan, and that's an interesting evening, and it's a memorable day because there was a dinner and there was a long conversation reported in As He Saw It by Elliot, in which Franklin Roosevelt expressed different opinions from the French, that the end of the war, after the war, will start a new page. The colonial times will have to be brought to an end. And so, like Franklin Roosevelt was saying that you need to modernize your economy, etc. And the Sultan said, we don't have the resources, we don't have the personnel, etc. But Franklin Roosevelt promised that they can come to America and get trained, etc., etc. And that's a different discourse that you hear from the French authorities. Next slide, please. So, as I said, and to complete that story, the dinner meeting was in January 1943. In January 1944, some of you, 11 January rings a bell. The Declaration of Independence of the Moroccans, just 100 years. And I wrote an article about this, and there were others who also wrote about it. The meeting actually emboldened the Sultan and all the nationalists to make higher demands. Instead of just reforms, now they wanted independence. They have seen a different country. America was a model. Forget about the America that we were talking about, and I completely agree with you about all the evils of social and racial discrimination. But at least the model that they were exporting to the world in the 1940s was incomparable to the other that was shown by the colonialists, the French, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, or worse, the Germans. So, we have to highlight that the meeting actually pushed the nationalists to become more aggressive. And there is a street here that I heard, Ahmed Yazidi, right? It's one of the nationalists who, on January 11th, went to the American consul with a letter saying that we want to inform you that we are making a new demand, and that's a Declaration of Independence. Now, I have highlighted these places here, the American bases in Morocco. Now, there is a downside to the story of Moroccan-American relations, and that's the agreement that the Americans signed with the French of establishing air bases in Morocco without the approval or even the consultation with the Moroccan Sultan. But we have to distinguish between Franklin D. Roosevelt as a president and his administration. The Secretary of State of Franklin D. Roosevelt was not happy with the sort of liberal declaration made by the president. And when Roosevelt died, obviously none of those promises were kept, and much later, in 1950, they made agreement, and then they established these military bases. The older generation would remember at least their parents talking about, my father was in the army, so he was telling me about Qnitra, the base in Qnitra, and how the Americans, actually there's a lot to say about that culturally. So these will constitute a point of controversy between independent Morocco and the United States. Next slide, please. No, before that, let's go back. Sorry, still there's something I want to say before we move in 1975. I'm almost down. So the negotiations took place, and when President Eisenhower visited Morocco in 1959, a short trip that you will see in the video if we have a chance to watch the video, Sultan or King Mohammed V asked him that he's got a lot of pressure from the nationalists, from the people, and from other Arab countries. How come that you accept foreign forces on your land? That is a sign of, subservience to a foreign country. So he asked Eisenhower, who was there in 1943, and they made an agreement, an initial agreement that they will pull their troops, which they did in the next few years. And the air naval base of Qnitra remained until 76. Next slide. Here's a crucial moment, 1975, the Green March and recuperation of the southern provinces of Morocco. This is a moment where obviously everyone was going through a lot of trial. In Morocco, we had a very delicate situations. 1971, 1972, 2 coups d'etats. And so the Green March was the moment that united Moroccans, the king and the parties together, but it also unleashed or opened another page of trouble for us from our neighbors and from a separatist entity called Polisario. And Morocco needed arms and weapons because the Polisario was getting all sorts of support, huge support. There was military superiority of the Polisario over the Moroccans. We had bigger or larger numbers of troops. Well, they were not fully equipped, and they were equipped with some old weapons. So Morocco needed American support. And it was a wavering support, especially during Jimmy Carter era. But the Americans always took the right decision eventually when they saw that a strategic ally is about to be weakened and undermined. Then they eventually decided to lend the support. And there were hard negotiations. And the Moroccans sometimes, King Hassan was sometimes angry and reproaching the Americans, why aren't you supporting us when we need the support? The Russians, the Cubans, the Libyans, all supporting, I'm talking about governments, all supporting the separatist group. Next slide. So let's talk now very briefly about past and present, the institutions, apart from the politics and the main events. There are some institutions that obviously consolidated this partnership between the U.S. and Morocco. One of them is U.S. aid. It's a major organ that supports all sorts of programs, social programs. The Peace Corps, established by President Kennedy in 1963, and one of the most favorite sites of the Peace Corps was Morocco. And Morocco opened doors for volunteers to come and serve in all sorts of fields, education, health, etc., etc. Then in 2004, Morocco was granted the status of non-NATO ally. And around the same time, the free trade agreement, which became operative in 2006 and still is the only African country that has a free trade agreement with the United States. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? It's a controversial thing. There are critics of the free trade agreement that we haven't benefited as we wish. But at the same time, it has given us a lot of incentives and advantages. And then obviously the Millennium Challenge Corporation, two major agreements. One, as you can see, the numbers are quite substantial. And then the Strategic Dialogue, 2012. And I think only a month ago or 2 months ago, you have Foreign Minister Blinken coming to Morocco, and was it in Washington D.C.? I can't remember, but they had their recent meeting a while ago. Strategic dialogue means it's not just having conversations and talking, but we have a solid partnership, and we can look forward to the future and make sure that everything works fine for both parties. Next slide. All right, some of the figures again, which I copied for you. So, before and after, Spain still remains, and it's becoming more so since we again become on good terms. But you could see that the United States has moved from 3.11% in 2007 and to fifth rank, 5.29%. So there's a steady growth of the volume of trade between both countries. Obviously, the balance is tilted in favor of the Americans, but that's because of their sophisticated weaponry. One helicopter, I would say, would equal hundreds of tons of phosphates. I don't know. I'm just saying. Next slide. All right, we conclude with the United States recognizing in December 2020 Moroccan sovereignty over the Sahara. This is, again, a benchmark. This is a something that obviously has so much impact on other countries. And you might say, again, there are controversy about that, whether the Biden administration has stressed enough the sovereignty of Morocco, or is still in the shady area as ever, as usual. The Americans are never, when it doesn't serve their purpose, they never commit themselves 100%. But it seems that this recognition cannot be withdrawn. I don't think Americans withdraw anything so dramatically unless there is some sort of dramatic development. And I think that would remain so for the next, I don't know, until the problem is solved finally. So there's a video that I want to show, if you want to show it. And then if you have questions, I have tried to be very brief, but there are lots of things that I could have elaborated on. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
They have met before, these.
Trying technical difficulties. But I think we're having technical difficulties.
Okay. All right. Well, what I did here was looking at all sorts of videos of Moroccan kings meeting with U.S. presidents and the kind of situations, you know, like selecting only that part which is relevant and put them together. And you could see how, you know, friendly and cordial those relationships, the reception in Morocco or in America. And there was a substance to it, not just formalities, but there was always some sort of agreement, some strong agreement to be signed or treaty to be negotiated. But if you can still watch them on YouTube, different, you know, King Mohammed V receiving Eisenhower, Hassan II meeting with President Kennedy, President Ronald Reagan, King Mohammed VI meeting George Bush, and then Bill Clinton arriving at the funeral in 1999. So all sorts of situations that show how, and they're in their own statements about the nature of this relationship. Obama in Cairo speech saying, the first country to recognize the United States is Morocco, and it's always reiterated. So, you know, that's all about it. Thank you very much.